September 11th, 2023, Nashville, Tennessee. George Tillman sat in the waiting room of his cardiologist's office for the second time in 3 months. He was 72 years old, a retired police officer, 42 years on the force, a man who had survived 2 armed standoffs, a rollover crash on I-40, and more Thanksgiving arguments than he could count. And now, he was sitting in a paper gown in a cold examination room, being told that his blood pressure was so far out of control that his doctor, Dr. Sandra Whitmore, wanted to add a second medication to his daily routine. George already took amlodipine every morning. He watched his salt. He did not smoke. He did not drink. He walked 30 minutes every single day around the block in his neighborhood in East Nashville. And his blood pressure was still reading 158/96, sometimes 162/99. "George," Dr. Robles said, "I think we need to go up a level here." George drove home that afternoon and told his wife, Pauline. And Pauline, a retired school nurse who had seen more than her share of medication side effects over the years, said 4 words that changed everything. "Let me try something." For the next 8 weeks, Pauline did not change George's medications. She did not put him on a special diet. She did not order supplements off the internet or sign him up for a gym. She simply, quietly, began replacing 5 or 6 items in their weekly grocery shopping with 7 specific foods. Foods George already enjoyed eating. Foods that were available at the Kroger on Gallatin Pike, 3 miles from their house. Foods that, Pauline had read, had been shown in clinical studies to do something that a second medication would also do, just without the fatigue, the swelling in the ankles, and the dizziness when standing up too fast. 8 weeks later, George went back to see Dr. Robles. His blood pressure read 134/82. Dr. Robles looked at her chart, then looked at George, then looked at her chart again. "George," she said, "what did you do?" He smiled. "I ate better." Today, I am going to tell you exactly what Pauline put in that grocery cart. I am going to tell you not just what these 7 foods are, but why they work. The specific mechanism inside your body that each one activates to bring blood pressure down, and why most people over 60 have never heard this explained in a way that makes sense. And yes, I am going to tell you what each one tastes like and how easy it is to add it to the food you are already eating. If this channel has ever helped you, please subscribe right now. The information here could be the most important thing you hear this week. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn about 7 foods. Real, whole foods that taste good, cost nothing extraordinary, and are available at every supermarket in America, that have been studied in clinical trials and found to measurably reduce both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Not in theory, not in animal models. In real human beings, many of them over the age of 60, many of them already on blood pressure medication. You are going to learn the specific numbers, how many points of blood pressure reduction, how quickly, and under what conditions. You are going to understand why these foods work at a biological level, not just that they do, but what they actually do inside the walls of your arteries. And you are going to understand how to combine them in a way that multiplies their effect so that the sum becomes greater than its parts. This is not a list. This is a conversation. Because when you understand the why, you do not need willpower to make the change. You just need information. Before we get to the 7 foods, I want to take 2 minutes to explain something that I believe is the most important thing you have never been told about blood pressure management. And that is this: blood pressure medication and blood pressure food work through entirely different mechanisms. They are not competing. They are not interchangeable. They work on different parts of the same system. And when you understand that, you will understand why the right food does not just lower a number on a cuff. It changes the underlying biology that produced the high number in the first place. Here's a simple way to think about it. Most blood pressure medications, the ACE inhibitors, the calcium channel blockers, the beta blockers, they work by intercepting a single point in the blood pressure chain. An ACE inhibitor like lisinopril blocks a specific enzyme. A calcium channel blocker like amlodipine relaxes the muscles in artery walls by blocking calcium entry. These are precise, targeted interventions. They are enormously effective, and they are absolutely necessary for many people. But they do not change the environment inside the artery. They do not reduce the oxidative stress that inflames artery walls. They do not increase the production of nitric oxide, the body's own natural vasodilator. They do not reduce the arterial stiffness that builds up over decades. They do not lower inflammation markers in the blood. They treat the symptom without changing the soil. The 7 foods I am about to describe, each one of them works at the level of the soil. They reduce inflammation. They increase nitric oxide. They improve the elasticity of artery walls. They counteract the sodium burden that keeps blood pressure elevated. And here is the remarkable thing. When food changes the arterial environment, the medication works better. George Tillman did not stop his amlodipine when his blood pressure dropped. His medication worked more effectively because the food had improved the conditions in which the medication was operating. That is the combination you are working toward. Not food instead of medication. Food that makes your medication more powerful and may, over time and with your doctor's guidance, mean you need less of it. Now, let's talk about the 7 foods. Food number 1. Beets, the most underestimated vegetable in your grocery store. The first food is one that most Americans over 60 walk right past in the produce section without a second thought: beets. And I understand the hesitation. Beets have an image problem. People either love them or they don't. But I want you to set aside whether you think you like beets for 1 minute, because the research behind this vegetable and blood pressure is among the most consistent and compelling in the entire field of nutritional cardiology. Here is the mechanism. Beets are extraordinarily high in naturally occurring dietary nitrates, not the synthetic nitrates used as preservatives in processed meats, but the beneficial kind found in whole vegetables. When you eat beets, your body converts those nitrates through a 2-step process involving your saliva and your digestive system into nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is, quite literally, the molecule your body uses to relax and widen blood vessels. Think of nitric oxide as the key that tells your arteries, you can loosen now. When nitric oxide levels in the bloodstream are adequate, artery walls relax. Blood flows more freely. The heart does not have to push as hard against resistance. And blood pressure drops. What do the numbers look like? A landmark clinical trial published in the journal Hypertension followed patients with high blood pressure who were given nitrate-rich beetroot juice daily for 4 weeks. By the end of the trial, their clinical blood pressure had dropped by an average of 7.7 points systolic and 2.4 points diastolic. No new medication, no dietary restriction, just beets, 7.7 millimeters of mercury. To put that in context, that is a reduction comparable to adding a low-dose medication to your routine. And a separate systematic review of beetroot juice studies found a consistent mean reduction of 3.55 points in systolic blood pressure. A number that, compounded over months and years of regular intake, translates into a meaningfully lower lifetime cardiovascular risk. Now, how do you eat beets without hating your life? Here are 3 ways that most people actually enjoy. First, roasted beets. Peel them, cut them into wedges, toss with a little olive oil and a pinch of black pepper, and roast at 400 degrees for 35 minutes. They come out tender and slightly sweet. Second, the sliced canned beets from the grocery store, a brand like Del Monte or Libby's with no added salt, added straight to a green salad with a drizzle of balsamic vinegar, takes 30 seconds. Third, a half glass of pure beet juice mixed with orange juice. You can find it at Whole Foods or Walmart as Beata, or just look for 100% beet juice. Chilled in the morning, it tastes nothing like you expect. Start with 2 or 3 servings of beets per week. That is all the evidence requires. Food number 2, blueberries, the tiny fruit that does big things to your arteries. The second food is one most people already have in their freezer or walk past in the produce section every week and do not realize they are looking at one of the most powerful cardiovascular protection foods that exists: blueberries. And I am not saying eat blueberries in a vague wellness culture way. I am saying this specifically based on the clinical evidence. Regular blueberry consumption has been shown in multiple controlled studies to reduce blood pressure, improve the function of the inner lining of blood vessels, and reduce the arterial stiffness that comes with age. Stiffness that is one of the primary drivers of isolated systolic hypertension, which is the most common form of high blood pressure in adults over 60. The mechanism is a class of compounds called anthocyanins, the pigments that give blueberries, blackberries, and cherries their deep blue and red colors. Anthocyanins do something quite specific in the body. They reduce oxidative stress in the walls of blood vessels. They suppress the inflammatory proteins that cause arterial walls to stiffen and thicken over time. and they improve what is called endothelial function, the ability of the inner lining of your arteries to respond appropriately to changes in blood flow by producing nitric oxide. One particularly striking study followed adults who ate approximately 200 grams of blueberries, that is roughly 1 cup, every day for 40 consecutive days. At the end of the 40 days, their systolic blood pressure had dropped by 5 millimeters of mercury. A different study conducted at the University of Reading found that a daily cup of blueberries over 6 months improved endothelial function measurably, and in older participants also produced a reduction in systolic blood pressure. Research published in the journal Circulation found that people with the highest anthocyanin intake in their diet had a significantly lower risk of developing hypertension than those with the lowest intake, and blueberries were the single largest anthocyanin source in the American diet. A 5-point drop in systolic pressure, that number matters. Each 5 millimeter reduction in systolic blood pressure is estimated to reduce the risk of stroke by approximately 14% and the risk of heart attack by approximately 9%. From blueberries. Blueberries that cost $3 a bag at Target. How do you eat them? Frozen blueberries are just as effective as fresh. The anthocyanins are not degraded by freezing. A cup of frozen blueberries, straight from the bag into plain Greek yogurt in the morning, into a bowl of oatmeal, which, as we'll discuss in a moment, is also on this list, into a smoothie with a banana, or simply thawed and eaten with a spoon. 1 cup a day, that is the target. Food number 3, garlic, the oldest medicine on your spice rack. The third food has been used for medicinal purposes for over 5,000 years across virtually every culture on Earth. And for a long time, the medical establishment in America considered it folk remedy, something grandmothers believed in, something without real clinical backing. That changed with the research. Because garlic, specifically fresh garlic, and to a nearly equal degree, aged garlic extract, has now been studied in more than 12 controlled clinical trials for its effect on blood pressure, and the results of those trials, compiled in multiple independent meta-analyses, are unambiguous. In people with diagnosed hypertension, garlic supplementation has been shown to reduce systolic blood pressure by an average of 8 to 9 millimeters of mercury. In some trials, including a landmark analysis published in a major nutrition journal, the reduction in people with elevated baseline systolic pressure reached as high as 16 millimeters of mercury systolic and 9 millimeters of mercury diastolic. 16 millimeters. That is the level of reduction you get from a commonly prescribed blood pressure medication. The mechanism is a compound called allicin, formed when raw garlic is chopped, crushed, or chewed, which breaks the cell wall of the garlic clove and triggers an enzymatic reaction that produces allicin. Allicin has been shown to relax and dilate blood vessels by stimulating nitric oxide production, the same mechanism we saw with beets. It also reduces something called angiotensin II, a protein in the body that constricts blood vessels and is a primary driver of blood pressure elevation. In fact, ACE inhibitors, some of the most commonly prescribed blood pressure medications in America, including lisinopril, work by blocking the same angiotensin-converting enzyme system that allicin naturally interferes with. Garlic is not doing something weird and herbal. It is working on the same biological pathway as your medication, at a lower magnitude, but consistently, every day, with every meal. How do you get enough? Here is the important detail most people don't know. You need to crush or chop the garlic and let it sit for 10 minutes before cooking. That resting period allows the allicin to fully form. If you throw minced garlic straight into a hot pan, the heat deactivates the enzyme before the allicin can develop. Crush it, let it sit 10 minutes, then cook with it. 2 cloves per day is the amount studied in most trials. That is 2 cloves in the pasta sauce on Monday, 2 cloves in the stir-fry on Wednesday, 2 cloves in the soup on Friday. You do not taste it as strongly as you expect, and your arteries will notice the difference over time. One note, if you take blood-thinning medication, please speak to your doctor before significantly increasing garlic intake. Garlic has a mild anticoagulant effect that can interact with warfarin and similar medications. Food number 4, dark chocolate, the one that makes my patients smile. I want to pause for a moment here, because every time I get to this one in a talk or a consultation, the reaction in the room changes. People sit up a little straighter, eyebrows go up. Someone in the back always says, "Really?" "Yes, really." Dark chocolate, with at least 70% cocoa content, has been studied extensively for its effect on blood pressure. And the evidence is, to put it simply, delicious. Here is the mechanism. Dark chocolate contains a class of compounds called flavonols, specifically epicatechin and catechin, that have been shown in peer-reviewed cardiovascular research to do something remarkable. They stimulate the inner lining of blood vessels to produce nitric oxide. More nitric oxide means more relaxed, more dilated arteries. And more relaxed arteries means lower blood pressure. The effect is direct, measurable, and reproducible across studies. A meta-analysis that combined data from multiple controlled trials found that cocoa consumption was associated with an average decrease of 4.5 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure and 2.5 millimeters in diastolic pressure. A specific study in elderly hypertensive subjects found a reduction of 5.2 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure after just 15 days of eating a small daily portion of dark chocolate. And a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that adults who consumed 100 grams of dark chocolate per day for 2 weeks showed significant reductions in both blood pressure readings compared to white chocolate controls. Now, and this is the critical part, we are talking about dark chocolate, 70% cocoa or higher, not Snickers bars, not milk chocolate, not the Hershey's Kiss Bowl by the front door. The flavonols that produce the blood pressure benefit are found primarily in the cocoa solids. And the higher the percentage of cocoa, the higher the flavonol content. Milk chocolate, which is diluted with milk solids and sugar, has a fraction of the flavonol content and does not produce the same effect. What does it actually taste like? I will be honest with you, 70% dark chocolate has a slightly bitter edge compared to what most Americans are used to. But it also has a depth and richness that milk chocolate does not have. The brand Lindt Excellence 70% Dark is widely available at Walmart, Walgreens, and most grocery stores across America. A single square, approximately 1 ounce, in the late afternoon or after dinner is the amount that most studies used. Not a whole bar, 1 square, eaten slowly, let it melt, and give it 2 weeks before you decide whether you like it. Most people find that once their taste adjusts, and it does adjust, the sweetness of milk chocolate starts to feel cloying by comparison. 1 ounce of 70% dark chocolate, 3 or 4 times a week. That is the target. And it is, I think you will agree, a prescription that is easier to follow than most. Food number 5, salmon. The fish that feeds your arteries from the inside. The 5th food is salmon. And before I explain why, I want to address the most common thing I hear from patients over 60 when I recommend fish. I don't really like fish. And to that, I always say, by the end of this explanation, you may feel differently about it. Because once you understand what salmon does inside your arteries, it becomes less about preference and more about priority. Here is the mechanism. Salmon is one of the richest dietary sources of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically the 2 forms called DHA and EPA. These are long-chain polyunsaturated fats that your body cannot make in sufficient quantities on its own. You have to eat them. And they do something in your cardiovascular system that no other nutrient does quite the same way. They improve the flexibility and responsiveness of artery walls. As we age, arteries naturally stiffen. The walls lose elasticity. Blood has to travel through less flexible channels, and the heart has to pump against more resistance. That increased vascular resistance is a primary driver of the rising systolic blood pressure that affects the majority of Americans over 60. DHA and EPA work at the cellular level inside artery walls, maintaining their flexibility. They reduce a process called lipid peroxidation, the same oxidative damage to fats inside vessel walls that we discussed when talking about the dangers of reheated foods. And they reduce inflammatory molecules in the bloodstream that contribute to arterial stiffening. The clinical numbers. A large meta-analysis published by the American Heart Association found that consuming approximately 3 grams per day of omega-3 fatty acids produced an average reduction of 4.5 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure in people with established hypertension. A separate study found that eating salmon specifically 3 times per week reduced diastolic blood pressure to a degree comparable to taking fish oil supplements. The fish itself, not a pill, but the actual food, produced measurable cardiovascular improvement in 8 weeks. The simplest ways to make salmon work in a real American kitchen. And here is where I want to be practical. A 6-ounce fillet of wild-caught Atlantic salmon from Costco or Sam's Club, baked at 375 degrees for 15 minutes with olive oil and lemon, is the simplest, most foolproof fish preparation that exists. It takes 19 minutes total. It tastes like nothing you would associate with healthy eating. Pink, flaky, slightly rich, with a clean, mild flavor. If you have been eating canned tuna your whole life, salmon will feel like an upgrade, not a sacrifice. Canned salmon, the kind in the tall pink cans at the grocery store like Bumblebee or Wild Planet, is also an excellent, inexpensive option, mixed into a salad, spread on a whole grain cracker, or made into salmon patties. 3 servings a week is the evidence-based target. Food number 6, oatmeal, the breakfast your heart has been waiting for. The 6th food is one you may already be eating, and if you are not, it is time to start. Old-fashioned oatmeal, not the instant packets loaded with sugar and artificial flavoring, not the oats in a granola bar. Plain rolled oats, the kind in the Quaker canister, cooked on the stove or in the microwave with water. Here is why oatmeal belongs on this list and why it is not just about fiber. Oats contain a specific type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan. And beta-glucan does something in the body that very few dietary fibers do. It forms a thick, viscous gel in the digestive system that physically binds to compounds, including cholesterol and certain sodium-binding proteins, before they are absorbed into the bloodstream. But beyond its effect on cholesterol, beta-glucan has been specifically studied for its effect on blood pressure. A systematic review that combined data from multiple controlled trials found that eating oats produced a mean systolic blood pressure reduction of 2.82 millimeters of mercury. While that is modest on its own, here is what matters about that number in the context of everything else we are discussing today. It compounds. Each of these 7 foods contributes a few points of reduction through a different mechanism. Beets raise nitric oxide. Blueberries reduce oxidative inflammation. Garlic inhibits angiotensin-converting enzyme activity. Dark chocolate stimulates endothelial nitric oxide production. Salmon reduces vascular stiffness. Oats bind and remove the compounds that drive cholesterol and sodium burden in the bloodstream. When you combine these effects, which we will talk about in a few minutes, the total reduction becomes genuinely meaningful. The point is not that oatmeal alone will fix your blood pressure. The point is that oatmeal, eaten daily as part of a pattern that includes these 7 foods, is doing quiet, consistent work inside your cardiovascular system every single morning. And here is the key detail about oatmeal that most people get wrong. You need at least 5 grams of beta-glucan per day to see the blood pressure benefit. 1 cup of cooked old-fashioned oats contains approximately 3 grams. Add half a cup of blueberries on top, which you are now adding anyway, and you are getting beta-glucan and anthocyanins simultaneously. 2 of our 7 foods in 1 bowl. Sliced banana on top, food number 7. And you have 3. That is your morning covered. One important note. Avoid the flavored instant oatmeal packets, the maple and brown sugar Quaker packets, the apple cinnamon ones. They contain between 12 and 15 grams of added sugar per serving, which more than offsets the beta-glucan benefit. Plain oats, sweetened if necessary with half a banana or a handful of blueberries, is what you are going for. Food number 7, bananas, the most accessible blood pressure medicine on the planet. The 7th food is the one that should be in your kitchen every single day, and the chances are high that it already is, a banana. But I want to go much deeper than bananas are good for you, because the specific reason bananas help blood pressure is something most people, even most doctors in a typical 7-minute appointment, do not fully explain. And once you understand the mechanism, you will never look at a banana the same way again. Your blood pressure, at its most fundamental level, is a function of fluid balance. Specifically, the balance between sodium and potassium inside and outside your cells. Sodium draws fluid into the bloodstream, increasing blood volume, which increases pressure. Potassium does the opposite. It actively encourages your kidneys to excrete sodium through urine, reducing fluid volume and lowering pressure. Think of sodium and potassium as 2 sides of a seesaw. When sodium is too heavy, blood pressure goes up. When potassium is added to the other side, the seesaw comes back toward balance. Most Americans over 60 are significantly potassium deficient. The daily adequate intake for potassium is 4,700 milligrams per day. The average American gets approximately 2,600 milligrams. That gap, over 2,000 milligrams per day of missing potassium, is a gap that blood pressure pays the price for. And here is the important thing a major new study found. Increasing potassium intake through foods like bananas is more effective at lowering blood pressure than reducing sodium intake. More effective. Not equally effective. More. One medium banana contains approximately 422 milligrams of potassium. That is nearly 1/10 of the daily target in one piece of fruit. But bananas are not the only potassium powerhouse you should be reaching for. Avocado, which is now widely available at every Walmart, Kroger, and Aldi in America, contains over 700 milligrams of potassium per half. Sweet potatoes baked and eaten with the skin contain approximately 540 milligrams. Cantaloupe, 1 cup of cubed cantaloupe, contains 427 milligrams. These are foods that most Americans over 60 enjoy and can access without any difficulty. For George Tillman, the addition of a banana with breakfast every morning and an avocado in his lunch salad 3 days a week accounted for more than 400 additional milligrams of daily potassium. Over 8 weeks, that shift in the sodium-potassium balance in his bloodstream, combined with the other dietary changes Pauline made, was the largest single contributor to his blood pressure coming down.